David, thank you so much for coming in. And I know you've been following these issues as I have, as far as the Supreme Court, as far as the tariffs and how the intersection of presidential power, this idea of a unitary executive, and how the SCOTUS is going to parse where the power of the president begins and ends vis-a-vis tariffs. Before we get to the SCOTUS, I would like to get your thoughts on what the law actually is regarding the president and the administration of tariffs.
Well, there are many ways that a president acting along with Congress can impose tariffs. And it's been done for decades. Normally, Congress takes the lead, but if there's a bill, a president has to, veto or approve that bill like any other bill. But it normally originates with Congress and it's handled by Congress. And there are trade committees that are kind of specialized in that. And then we have a U.S. trade representative that negotiates with different countries on the tariffs. But what we have now is totally extraordinary. And it's why I think that even this U.S. Supreme Court will strike it down and not allow these tariffs to stay in effect. They're being done under emergency legislation passed under Carter. And that emergency legislation under Carter is for a true emergency. To give you an example, in the 50 years almost since it was enacted, it's never been actually executed by any president. So it's obviously very unusual, very extraordinary. And the justification for it would be if something truly extraordinary had just happened. And this might be something like the OPEC oil shocks of the 70s, that it was done kind of in reaction or thinking about. Nothing like that has happened. We have a trade imbalance, and we've had one for decades. We still have a trade imbalance. Ironically, the trade imbalance is even worse now, in part because of Trump's mismanagement of the economy. The other supposed emergency that allows the president to take this extraordinary power that he has over tariffs, country by country, all by himself and without Congress agreeing, is that we have fentanyl and drugs coming into the country. Well, that, too, has been going on for decades, and it's no extraordinary situation. Indeed, since the last year or so, fentanyl and drugs have somewhat come down, and so neither one is an emergency. Now, the progress of this litigation is that there were several courts that heard it. There's a trade court that no one's heard much about until it came to prominence when it ruled in this case that Trump's tariffs were illegal. That went up to an appeals court in Washington, D.C. that has 11 members. They split 7-4 to say that these tariffs were illegal. They should not be imposed. There was no emergency that supported the president acting unilaterally as he has, but they did not stop or stay the collection of the taxes.
Hey, David, let me
just say,
let me jump in there real quick.
These tariffs are still being collected. That's one of the anomalies. That's one of the reasons that people who think the Supreme Court is just going to rubber stamp what Trump did think that, despite my opinion and despite how the argument went just the other day, which was not well for Trump, they think, well, if the U.S. Supreme Court were really going to stop these tariffs from being collected, they would have stopped them already from being collected. But I have a theory on that, but let me let you talk. You're the host.
Yeah, I'm curious. There's one thing I would disagree with you respectfully, and it's this. I wonder where your optimism comes from this Supreme Court not rubber stamping specifically this issue regarding Trump and tariffs. And I say that knowing good and well that this is the same SCOTUS which basically created this Frankenstein monster where there are no limitations to his power. And if we look at the history of their rulings, when it had to do with policy unrelated to Donald Trump, they were more inclined to actually use the law and precedent. But this SCOTUS has said that, I think it was Clarence Thomas, has said that, there's really no such thing, paraphrasing, as settled law. And I'm inclined to believe that this argumentation, although they may be asking questions which may give the indication that they're not siding with the president, history proves that they've sided with the president when it comes to what the president does. Where's your optimism coming from that they won't side with him on this particular issue?
Well, if past is prologue, that's not good. This is the same court that gave us Dobbs overturning Roe v. Wade after 50 years. This is the same court that gave us presidential immunity, which is a monstrosity. and several other cases that have really irked is too soft a word, that really have troubled and given great anxiety that they are just a rubber stamp for this President Trump. But the reason I'm optimistic about this decision, first of all, the argument. You can gain an awful lot from the oral argument, which just happened a couple of days ago. And, the three moderate to liberal justices, they're going to realize this is ridiculous. This is no emergency. This is just an arrogation to himself of power by Trump. So you've got to figure out, okay, what are the other ones going to do? And Gorsuch and the Chief Justice both ask questions from which people conclude that they understand that this is a huge taking of power by the president. I think Justice Gorsuch asked the question, this would really upset the balance of power, the separation of powers, because it is such an arrogation of power. And to say it's in the name of foreign affairs, if we're going to do that, then the president will be a king in foreign affairs. And the president's not a king either in foreign affairs or in domestic affairs. So from Gorsuch's question, that was very good. And Chief Justice Roberts asked another question where he kicked around this foreign affairs thing, but he definitely got it, that this is something that falls in Congress's purview. And so there's two other reasons why I'm also optimistic, a little bit inside baseball, but I think this decision is so important and trying to handicap how it's going to come out. One is that they have kicked around something called the major case doctrine. And they use this major case doctrine to really screw Biden and the Democratic administration. Now, you might say, well, they're the biggest hypocrites that the world has ever seen in their black robes on the U.S. Supreme Court, so they won't be consistent. But it is certainly the goal of a Supreme Court to be consistent. And to the extent that they have a sense of their place in history, they may find this a way to be consistent and to also kind of back up this major case doctrine. And the way that that works is that when Congress gives power to agencies, gives away its power either to an agency or to the president, if it's a major case, if it's something really important, the U.S. Supreme Court has invented this major case doctrine that the language has to be really explicit. And certainly the language, if the theory is that Congress has somehow given this power to the president to act in an emergency, and while they haven't mentioned the word tariffs, it really ought to include tariffs. Whatever else you could say about that, to me, overextension, it is not the major case doctrine. This is a major case. They said power plants were a major case. They said student loans, which involved about $400 billion in loan forgiveness to all these poor kids and older people that I think should have their loans forgiven. But the Supreme Court struck that down, and they said these kind of major cases, power plants, student loans, Congress has to be very clear. Well, Congress has not been very clear here at all. And so it would allow the conservatives on the Supreme Court to say, we didn't just do this to Biden, we also did this to Trump. We believe in this major case doctrine. And then when the Democrats back into power, they can keep whacking the Democrats and their plans to help the country by saying, you see, we maintain this major case doctrine throughout Biden, throughout Trump, and throughout the next Democratic president. By the way, Kagan, one of the liberals to moderates on the court, said this major case doctrine is completely invented, made out of whole cloth. But you see that conservatives will say, no, it's not. And what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And we applied it to Trump, and we struck this down. The other question, just really briefly, was from Barrett. And Barrett said, this is going to be a huge mess, isn't it? And she got really focused on this question of what a mess. And that's actually a good sign, because she can then be persuaded that she should do the right thing and strike this down as not a proper arrogation of power to himself by the president in this foreign affairs, in this tariffs area. It's not a proper exercise of power. And don't worry about the mess. If you think about it, you cannot go into any court in this land and say, Your Honor, I made a huge mess and now I should benefit. I took the wrong turn like Trump did. I've now created trillions of dollars of problems. And now it's too hard to unsort the egg. I scrambled this egg. I did it unlawfully. I did it beyond my powers. But you can't unscramble this egg. They can easily unscramble the egg, and they can tell Amy Coney Barrett, you can unscramble this egg because we have courts of claims. We have other administrative ways. And if you think about it, why didn't they stop the collection of the tariffs? If you believe, as I do, that they're going to strike this down and deal with the fact that, yes, they've allowed the collection of billions and billions of dollars worth of tariffs. They were collected by the U.S. government. The U.S. government has a deep, deep pocket. You can get the money back from the U.S. government if they're wrong, as they are. Suppose they'd stopped the collection of tariffs, and then they'd said that the law was valid, what Trump is doing. They never could have collected them later on. So as between those two irreparable harms, you can see where the Supreme Court said, you know what? The claimants who keep good accounting records can always get the money back from the U.S. government. How would the U.S. government have gotten the money back if we had gone the other way? Now, that leaves the last question. How do we consumers get our money back? Once these companies that keep really good accounting records, once they get their money back, how do I get my money back from Amazon that I overpaid? How do I get my money back from this neighborhood store that I overpaid? I mean, you can go to your neighborhood store and try. There'll be class actions against Amazon. But at the end of the day, that's not the U.S. Supreme Court's problem. Their problem is to get it right. And I truly believe they're going to strike this one down, even though they're Trump's guys.
Let me go beyond the Supreme Court. And I know that you probably saw this article in the LA Times talking about basically putting a limit on the recklessness and the lawlessness, my word, of the Trump administration. And we do know that not all of these issues are going to make their way to the Supreme Court. Not all these things are going to get to the Supreme Court docket. We also know that the DOJ, once upon a time, used to be a separate and independent portion of our government. There was this invisible partition between the executive branch and also the judicial branch. That doesn't exist anymore. How is it going to be possible or feasible to push back against the lawlessness of Donald Trump if a lot of these cases are not going to make it to the Supreme Court and we have judges and the DOJ who are complicit?
Well, come the restoration, there will be an accounting, and you hope that the accounting will be thorough and that, we get to overturn and undo some of these things that are being done. I've always said, the minute the Democrats have enough power to stop it, stop the ballroom. We don't need a huge ballroom. As far as I'm concerned, in the restoration, they should literally restore that building the way it was as best they can. And as a metaphor, as much as we can, we should try to restore things. Now, when it comes to, let's say, some of the pardons, there are outrageous pardons. There's the one that one of Trump's friends, I think she offered $200,000 to pardon her son who had like a $5 million fraud. And Trump's people said, no, that's not enough. It need take $1 million. And so mommy gave $1 million and Sonny got a huge pardon. And when the pardon fell, so did the restitution. He doesn't have to pay the $5 million back. When Santos got his pardon, the restitution fell. The people that he cheated, that guy with the dog that he told a lie to and cheated that guy, that restitution fell with it. So there's some of that. There's people like Comey, who I think will ultimately have his case dismissed. He will win his case. He will not be convicted and sentenced in a court of law at the end of the day. Neither will that New York Attorney General, Letitia James. But will they go through enormous suffering and anxiety caused for nothing but vindictive reasons by Trump? Yes. And, there's no amount of money that's really going to make that whole. That's, Trump managed to bamboozle the voters, get himself in there. And he's doing an awful lot of awful things that probably can't get undone. When you come to the lawyers may have their day of reckoning because the lawyers who have done things that violate bar rules will have to face the bar. And a lot of them may lose their licenses. And I think people like, I think Kash Patel's a lawyer. Bondi, the attorney general, is a lawyer. And I think they ought to have, among other people, a bar lawyer on speed dial. That's going to, what happened with Eastman? Eastman got disbarred by the California bar after the advice that he gave to Trump saying that he could have those slates and do all those shenanigans. And he never had to answer for it in a criminal court, but he had to answer before the California State Bar as to his unethical conduct. So I think that will be a big issue for some of the people that we hear about. There's not a, but by the way, I want to mention one thing before we don't have a chance to say it. I know you from 2018 when you were on CNN Newsroom at the same time that I was with John Voss. We sure did. And you were a great guest. And I was on with John Voss where he had a left-wing guest and a right-wing guest. And then John would turn to me, fourth person at the table, and he would say, Mr. Katz, you an assistant U.S. attorney. What is the law on that? So I got to umpire, And then my friend said, you're umpiring and you're always calling balls on Trump. I said, well, if he does something legal, I'll say on national TV he did something legal. Let him do something legal so I can say he did something legal. But if he does something illegal Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'm on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, yes, 3 times a week I'm saying he did something illegal, because 3 times a week they're asking me about something illegal that Trump did. And that was the first term. This, of course, has been a horror show, this second term.
David Katz, former federal prosecutor. I could speak to you all day, all night. I love the inside baseball part of all this, but we can't do it. But let's do it again. I'm quite sure we can do it again next week if you can join us with your wisdom.
Delighted to be with you next Thursday.
Absolutely.
Best of luck to you on the show. Kim and I also go back to that era when I was on with you. When I was on with you in 2018 on CNN Newsroom, I was on with her on the Thurston Show, the Pat Thurston Show.
Yes.
Okay, shout out to Kim.
Look at you, Kim, superstar. David Katz, thank you so much for that.
Great to be with you.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.